US President Joe Biden is known for his gaffes, but this one might be deliberate. At the recent Quad summit, as reporters were just leaving the venue to allow for a closed-door meeting between Quad leaders, Biden was caught in a hot mic moment, lambasting China and Xi Jinping in the most candid way.
We believe Xi Jinping is looking to focus on domestic economic challenges and minimize the turbulence in China diplomatic relationships, and he's also looking to buy himself some diplomatic space, in my view, to aggressively pursue China's interest. China continues to behave aggressively, testing us all across the region, and it's true in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, South Asia, and the Taiwan Straits. And it's true across the scope of our relationship, including on economic and technology issues. At the same time, we believe intense competition requires intense diplomacy. I spoke with President Xi in April. My national security advisor recently traveled to Beijing for a few weeks ago. And we see this engagement as important for conflict prevention and crisis management amidst our strategic competition.
Biden was heard saying that Chinese President Xi Jinping is, and I quote, looking to buy himself some diplomatic space to aggressively pursue China's interest. He said that China continues to, and I quote, behave aggressively, testing us all across the region on several fronts, including on economic and technology issues. This confirmed the ultimate agenda of the Quad. At the end of the day, the Quad's eyes are all on China. So let's talk about the Quad. Why is it so special? Why is China on the agenda? And what makes India a central link of the Quad? The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or the Quad, is an informal strategic alliance of 4 nations: India, Japan, the United States, and Australia. Recently, leaders of Quad nations sat down in President Joe Biden's residence in Wilmington, Delaware, for the Quad summit. Biden was joined by Prime Minister Modi of India, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese of Australia, and the outgoing Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. The Quad is known for its Indo-Pacific focus and its unstated objective: countering China. Born out of concerns over the rising influence of China in the Indo-Pacific region, its roots can be traced back to the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, when these nations first came together for coordinated disaster relief. The idea was formalized in 2007 under Japan's then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who envisioned a regional framework to promote peace and stability. However, the alliance faced challenges early on, with Australia pulling out in 2008 amid pressure from China. The group remained dormant until 2017, when renewed concerns over China's growing influence led to its revival. Under the leadership of former US President Donald Trump, the late Prime Minister of Japan Shinzo Abe, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and Australia's former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, the grouping made tremendous strides, becoming a decisive and consequential group in putting up a diplomatic, economic, and even military front against China. Since then, the Quad has expanded its scope, focusing on issues like Indo-Pacific security, economic cooperation, securing supply chains, emerging technologies, and more. The mantra has been clear over the years: a group of like-minded nations with shared values that have agreed to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. This year's summit in Delaware was no different. It highlighted how far the Quad has come, from disaster relief to a full-fledged security and economic partnership, and a veiled consensus on the need to counter China's hegemonic aggression in the region. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, without naming China in his address, said that the Quad was not against anybody, but that it was here to stay. Let me quote him: "We are meeting at a time when the world is surrounded by conflicts and tension. At such a time, it is important for all of humanity that the Quad members move forward based on democratic values. We are not against anybody. All of us support rules-based international order, respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, and peaceful resolution of all disputes." He went on, A free, open, inclusive, and prosperous Indo-Pacific is our shared priority and shared commitment. Meanwhile, Biden said, "We are democracies who know how to get things done. That's why within the first days of my presidency, I reached out to your nations to propose that we elevate the Quad, making it more consequential. 4 years later, our 4 countries are more strategically aligned than ever before." Finally, Biden said the same words as Modi. The Quad is here to stay.
The Quad is here to stay, I believe.
Let me quote him. "While challenges will come, the world will change, but the Quad is here to stay." So what is happening here? Well, essentially this. There were murmurs of late of Quad losing its magic. With the Russia-Ukraine war, the focus shifted towards the Kremlin. It provided cover fire for China, whose aggression against Taiwan and in the South China Sea continued. The world also shifted its focus away from the Indian border with China, where the two are locked in a 4-year-long military standoff. Meanwhile, differences between India and the US over Khalistani terror emerged, and allegations of Indian spying in Australia made things more uncomfortable. The focus equally shifted away from China's aggression in the East and South China Seas, which impact Japan and most Southeast Asian nations. Moreover, in 2023, Australia had to cancel the Quad summit because President Biden had to skip it at the last moment owing to debt ceiling negotiations in his home country. The meeting then took place on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Japan. Later, India, scheduled to host in 2024, planned a Quad meeting for January this year, but that also did not come through, largely because Biden wasn't available because of domestic commitments. Add to this the fact that the Quad's leading light, Shinzo Abe, was no more. The former visionary Japanese leader was assassinated in 2022. So the Quad seemed to have lost its way. But as Biden prepares to leave office by the end of this year, he is focused on correcting his legacy. And that's where the USA's push to reinvigorate the Quad comes in. The US had recently requested to swap plans with India to host the summit in Biden's Delaware residence, and India will now be hosting the Quad summit next year with a new set of leaders from the US and Japan. When asked about the future of the Quad, specifically whether the Quad will survive beyond the November election in the US, President Biden turned to PM Modi, placing a hand on his shoulder and said, "Way beyond November." This seems to be an indication of how India is likely to drive the Quad forward. After all, at this point, since 2017, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is the only constant among all other leaders in the group. He has another 5-year term ahead of him, and dealing with the China challenge has been a core focus of his government. At this summit, Modi was appreciated by Biden, Albanese, and Kishida for India's leadership of the Indian Ocean region. He is expected to carry the Quad forward in its true form, and hence the words, "The Quad is here to stay." At the recent Quad summit in Delaware, India's leadership was evident across several key initiatives. India pledged $7.5 million to the Quad Cancer Moonshot and will provide 40 million HPV vaccine doses through the Serum Institute of India. The Quad at Sea mission and the Indo-Pacific Logistics Network further spotlight India's focus on regional maritime safety and disaster response. Moreover, India will host the first maritime training workshop in 2025, signaling its growing influence in maritime domain awareness. Maitri will enable regional partners to monitor and secure their waters, enforce their laws, and deter unlawful behavior. India is clearly emerging as a central force in shaping the Quad's goals for the Indo-Pacific region. Further, a semiconductor supply chains contingency network was also announced at a time when India is fast building manufacturing capacity of homegrown chips. The push for digital public infrastructure, or DPI, for the Indo-Pacific also has India's markings all over it, since it is a pioneer in the field, having deployed innovative tech like the UPI. The leaders also agreed to reform the UN Security Council, focused on the expansion of the permanent membership to make way for India and Japan to the high table. This brings us to the final part of this video. Some commentators have called India a weak link in the Quad due to its strategic autonomy, its balanced relations with Russia, and political differences with the West. However, the reality is different. While the US, Japan, and Australia all face a massive threat from growing Chinese hegemony and are therefore focused deeply on Indo-Pacific security, India is central to the Quad's Indo-Pacific strategy because of its geographic location, its control of key maritime routes in the Indian Ocean, and its rising economic and diplomatic clout. Around 60% of global maritime trade passes through the Indian Ocean, making India's role in ensuring security crucial. India has a maritime coastline of 7,517 kilometers. India has extensive island territories on both the eastern and western flanks of the Indian Ocean, including the Andaman and Nicobar Islands to the east and the Lakshadweep Islands to the west. These islands enhance its strategic depth and maritime reach. Couple this with a formidable navy, and India monitors and safeguards key sea lanes that are crucial for global trade. Its naval capabilities, supported by these island territories, enable India to project power and maintain security far beyond its shores. Further, India has a long land border with China at approximately 4,000 kilometers. It is the only country to exchange blows with China in recent decades, specifically during the Galwan Valley clash, and this gives it a unique position within the Quad. No other Quad member shares this direct and recent experience of military confrontation with China, making India's stance critical in countering China's assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific. Moreover, India's status as an alternative manufacturing hub to China and its vast consumer market further solidify its importance. Without India's cooperation, no Indo-Pacific strategy could fully succeed, especially as India is increasingly seen as a counterweight to China's dominance in the region. This makes India an indispensable link of the Quad, if not the strongest, and its leadership ahead is going to be of great consequence to the group's future.